Hi, everybody. I'm back, and I have a very special guest with me right here, or maybe he's over here when it actually comes through on video. This is Dr. Noah DeCuellar. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to answer all your questions that I know are burning. I first want to say a hug and a high five to you because I know that you are giving it your all when it comes to this program. I'm always standing back and watching and jumping in where I can to support you. But I have to definitely acknowledge each and every one of you for all the great work that you're doing, the changes that you're making, and how you're leveraging your health with every day and week that goes by. So today we are going to talk about everything bread and grain, because if there is one thing in this program that comes back around like a boomerang, it is this topic. And I get it because I have Noah, you don't know this, but I have told everybody about my giant gateway drug called bread. And now I have all these habits and rituals that help me keep it in check and in control. I want to talk about some of the reasons why it's so wildly important to even consider it. So, this is the point of the program typically where you're really starting to get it. I mean, you're starting to make a lot of these low sugar, whole food lifestyle, more from a detox and more into a lifestyle. But you're starting to ask yourself, as I make this a lifestyle, what part of my lifestyle should I be considering when it comes to brains and brains? Wow. When it comes to grains, isn't that funny that I said that? Mm-hmm. When it comes to grain and when it comes to bread. So we're going to get a little bit granular on this. But first, let's me back up and say, Dr. Noah DeCuellar is a colleague of mine. He's been a practicing chiropractor for knocking on almost close to 20 years. We have known each other personally and professionally for at least 5 years. And I have to tell you and get you going on one of the most amazing, massive think tank organizations that he has co-founded with two of also my very good friends. It is called Beyond Your Wildest Genes. If you've not heard of it, I'm going to ask you to crawl out from underneath your rock and take a look at it. www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com. Many of the things that we're going to be talking about today are very much incorporated in a lot of the programs that they do. They do online projects and programs called, the Anti-Aging and Longevity Project. I think you also did one called the Pain Relief Project, which was all about natural pain relieving. Yep. Things are always coming forward. They have an incredible podcast, again, called Beyond Your Wildest Dreams. Genes rather, and it's you can find it on iTunes. Dr. Noah, is it also on Spotify and YouTube as well? Can they watch it there?
It is, yes. And actually, we can get your interview is on YouTube, and it's also in our archives. And surprisingly, a week or so ago, we found out we're on Spotify too. So we're all over the place.
Well, how cool is that? So here I am. We're already talking. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Okay. All right, so this is not a keto program per se. This is not a paleo program per se. This is not a primal eating program per se. But a lot of people ask me this, and we talk about it a lot because this is very much a low sugar, whole food, fat adapted program. It's the way I live my lifestyle. It's the way I've coached many of my practice members to great success, which is why this whole online sugar detox began. And for you, Dr. Noah, this is somewhat, true to your heart, correct, as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is the way I've lived my life, like you, for probably close to 10 years now. You're right. This isn't a keto, this isn't a primal, this isn't a paleo, but, what I've done over the last, 3, 4, 5 years is try to whittle things down, because I listened to your interview you did with Dr. Mike yesterday, just to kind of study a little bit. And you mentioned how, it's hard, it's diet and what to eat is confusing. So you kind of whittled it down to one thing, and that was sugar, right?
Yeah.
And try to decrease sugar. And for years and years, probably 15 years, I've been lecturing. When I was a child, I can remember a commercial on TV, and there was this guy, and he was standing on a ledge, and he screams out and he goes, "You can eat cake." And that was an Entenmann's commercial because they removed all the fat from the Entenmann's cakes, and now the cakes were healthy. And then you fast forward, you got all these different types of movements like Atkins or Weight Watchers and Jenny, whatever. We could put any kind of name to it you want. And it's confusing. So, what can we do to kind of narrow this down or create a lens. And that's what I've done. I've kind of created a lens, and I've used the ancestral model of health to kind of create a lens for all my health decisions for my practice members, for my patients, and for my family. And maybe we can start there and just talk about that lens, which helps you make any health decision you want to make, and kind of clarify it a little bit. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's start there, because I think, you know, for a lot of this, it really comes down to philosophy, doesn't it? Like, what's your philosophy about eating? And it almost becomes a foundation for you, because when you're deciding what to lean into, what to say yes to, and what to kind of minimize or go away from, you know, you kind of have to have a framework to go by. So, you know, why is this even important? Why are we even talking about this? You know, can you kind of give me your thoughts on that beyond even what you just said?
Yeah, let's just get a little bit, tiny bit geeky a little bit. And you've probably talked about this all the time, but, you know, you could first start about some of the most classic books that have been written about this most recently, with Dr. William Davis, who I believe is a cardiologist, wrote Wheat Belly. And that whole book basically talks about how wheat has been hybridized or genetically altered to not look like the wheat that we ate 10,000, 20,000, maybe 30,000 years ago, or even just a couple hundred years ago. You know, last week I was in the Catskills in New York, and there's always a bakery that I go into, not to get bread, but to get coffee. But they had Einkorn bread, Einkorn. And that's what most people consider the ancient grain, like kind of like what grain really was. And I almost picked up the loaf and I put it back down and said, no, I'm not gonna go there. But wheat has gone through so many hybridizations that it's extremely unrecognizable. And that's basically Dr. Williams' take. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned brain before when you wanted to say grain, but Dr. Perlmutter, who's an incredible, enlightening neurologist, brilliant man, wrote Brain Maker and Grain Brain. And again, that just talks about what wheat does, and all grains does, to your brain, to your gut. And it's terrible. And in those, so your audience are probably familiar with those two names. A name that they may not be familiar with is Dr. Alessio Fasano, who's a pediatric gerontologist. He's an Italian medical doctor. But his team, 18 years, almost 20 years ago, they discovered a molecule called zonulin. I know it sounds like something from outer space, ZONULIN, but that is the molecule that's created that opens up the tight junctions in your stomach, or which creates leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So when you look at your intestines, it's really only like one cell that goes all the way down, and it's got to be tight junctions. Those cells are tight, and they're supposed to keep whole proteins out. When zonulin is in abundance there, those cells open, those tight junctions are no longer tight, whole proteins sneak through, and we now know that whole protein sneaking through your intestinal lining is what activates or overactivates your immune system and creates things like muscular dystrophy, MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetes, celiac disease, you name it. And we also know that there's a huge gluten component to it. That gluten, zonulin, intestinal permeability, and trickle down the road to autoimmune diseases are all right there. And it's, now, for a while it wasn't believed, intestinal permeability or leaky gut, that's nonsense. But this is 18-year-old science, and sometimes it takes 20, 30, 40 years to make or more, sometimes 50 years to get to the mainstream, but it's there, it's real, it's been proven a zillion times over. Yeah. And those are some of the scientific reasons why once you go do a sugar detox and you're back on the plan and you're trying to create a sustained healthy lifestyle, there's really no place for wheat primarily, and most of the other grains as well.
Well, and I think this bears repeating because, we kind of go, well, it's hard for us to feel like, for some of us, like, Parkinson's is like a big concern for us. But the reality is we're talking about those neurodegenerative diseases. We're also talking about mental, emotional well-being, which we definitely know anxiety and depression are through the roof. 20 plus years ago when I started in practice, I'm sure it was almost as big an issue, but no one spoke about it. Now there is hardly an intake form that I take in my office where someone is not talking about
depression, right?
depression, anxiety, whatever, just not feel like brain fog, not feeling like they should be feeling, and ultimately this trickles down not only into the disease, but it also trickles down into your ability to enjoy and show up in your life, which I think is in some ways almost the bigger thing, because we don't even know what these things are doing to us until we take them out of our diet and take them out of our lifestyle and start to minimize them. And of course, the big one in all of this is really what you're talking about as well, is just inflammation in general, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we now know that inflammation, and this was on the Time magazine like 30 years ago. Inflammation is the root cause of all disease, cancer, heart disease, autoimmune. I mean, it is. That's why you might be able to just whittle down all healthy diets into an anti-inflammatory diet, and then just break it off through there. Another story, something that came up just because you're talking about depression, it just popped in my mind. Yesterday, I had a new patient, and she had this molecular tattoo sign on her over here. And I'm like, what is that? And she goes, it's serotonin and dopamine. And I go, that's pretty interesting. It's like, and then it was a story, but I said, do you know, almost all of your serotonin and dopamine is created in your stomach. It's not created in your brain. Everybody thinks they are neurotransmitters and they communicate in your brain, and they are reasons for depression and anxiety, all that kind of stuff, but they're not even created in your brain, or 90% of it's created in your enteric nervous system that travels through your vagus and other channels up to your brain. So there's another reason why, if we know gluten in bread is inflaming, like you just mentioned, and it causes intestinal permeability, you could build a stronger and bigger case. The case is it's so enormous to build against it that it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that gut-brain axis is just so incredibly important. And it's funny you say that, because I actually wrote that down. I think that's such an important component, is for people to recognize where neurotransmitters are. I mean, of course, your brain's important. I get that. But I think we fail to fully understand and grasp just how important a lot of these great choices that people are making builds and builds not only how you feel, but how you function and how you heal and how you regenerate, and on an ongoing basis. And, there are aspects of this that go beyond what most people find about in day-to-day life. So, I've always encouraged people to read a lot of Dr. David Perlmutter's information. I sense not many of you are opening the pages of that book. So I post videos and so on, little excerpts. This is exactly why I want to talk about this, is because I just think it bears repeating so much. So, what does it mean to follow an ancestral diet? Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Yeah,
sure. So 2.6 million years ago or so, is when the Paleolithic era started. And that's when we as humans started developing as humans, right? We are all hunter-gatherers. That's just what we did. We gathered nuts and seeds and maybe dug up a tuber that was edible. Or if we were lucky enough to run into a beehive, we might eat the honey. Or if we were near the ocean, we would collect shellfish and eat shellfish. In fact, that's why our brains got so much bigger ancestrally, is because we started eating those types of things, and that's why our cognitive function exploded. But this kind of way of and then we hunted wild game and ate that, and that's just the way we ate for like 2.54 million years. And then around the Neolithic era, which happened around 10,000 years ago, we started cultivating grains all across the globe. And it's debatable when this happened. It could be as long as 100,000 or 10,000. Yeah, those kind of things. That's minutia. But we started cultivating grains. In the Asian countries, is more rice, and around here is grains and wheat and whatever, barley. It doesn't really matter. And we also started, milking different animals like, cows, sheep, and goat. And that allowed us to explode explode as a species and really populate the entire world. But the truth is that yes, we populated the whole world, but when we look back to see how healthy these people were, these hunter-gatherers, they were far healthier than we were now. And particularly the second we instituted grains and dairy into our diet, for the most part, that's when we started seeing dental caries. We got shorter, all sorts of things that you wouldn't think of. But and everybody said, oh, the cavemen or the Neanderthal, they weren't as healthy, or they died really young. Yeah, well, they died young because they got some sort of weird infection hunting down a mammoth, and falling off a cliff. They didn't die of heart disease or cancer or diabetes. That stuff didn't exist, right? So that's kind of like the evolution of the human being. But we can take that and create a lens for all our health choices. Now, we're primarily talking about diet today, but you could take an ancestral or primal or whatever you want to call it, way of living and make your best sleep choices, your best mental state choices, your best exercise choices, anything, and make all those decisions through this lens. And for diet, I mean, it's really simple. So we know that the hunter-gatherer type of diet was fruits, and not even fruits. Let's start with vegetables, roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, wild game, eggs, and then seasonal fruit, right? Because fruit is only available, and you might agree with me, Dr. Laura, but this is the time of the year, if you're going to have fruit, to eat fruit. These 3 months, basically, particularly for where we live, and we live a little bit different, but because that's when it was abundant as a species. There's no bananas in December, right?
Yep.
So and that's the basic framework of a paleo primal diet. And you could call it, we've talked about it, you can call it anything you want, but it's just the way our genetics were developed over millions and millions of years. And that's wherein lies that genetic mismatch, where now 10,000, 20,000 years ago, we started eating a whole bunch of grains and dairy. And I don't demonize dairy that much. That's a whole nother conversation we could probably talk about for another 30 minutes. But that's the genetic mismatch, is our genes are not set up in most cases to consume large amounts of grains. Yes, there are epigenetic, and that means above the genes, changes where there's certain populations that they can tolerate dairy or they can eat grains. That kind of stuff exists, and that's the beauty of our body and epigenetics. And we're living beyond your genes or beyond your wildest genes, like our podcast. But for the most part, nearly everybody is going to function better, live a better life if 80, 90, 95% of the time they're eating vegetables, and a variety of vegetables. And that's my next topic. Variety of vegetables, things like sweet potatoes, and plantains, and then sprinkle some meat and a whole bunch of fish and nuts and seeds, and you'll thrive that way, at least nutritionally anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is exactly what we end up talking about all through the program. Now, I know you haven't seen the types of things that we talk about, but you can imagine they're very similar. Now, I always get this question from people. They're like, why are we talking about what was good for man 2 million years ago? Because we're different now. That's what people say to me. We're different. We're not those people. But the truth is, we are those people. I mean, how much of our genes have changed?
We are different. I mean, yeah, it's changed. It's so, now we mentioned it. You can have very quick epigenetic changes, but there's been no really massive, widespread epigenetic change where we can all consume wheat and grains. It just hasn't happened. And it may happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Yeah. But yeah, we're very, you could take those genes. I mean, if you look at an ape, the difference in genes is only like 0.4%, something so small. Yeah. So we're no different. So we haven't changed. Yeah. Things have changed around us that have, with electronics and EMF, all that kind of craziness. But really, things haven't changed that much inside of us at all.
And really what we're talking about is we're not talking about being alive. We're talking about leveraging health, aren't we? We're talking about optimizing and, leveraging where you are now so you're having an experience beyond what you imagine is possible. Because the reality is, we can be living so much longer than we already are. We have the capability on our own in a way that is in alignment with how the physiology of the body actually works. And that's really what we're talking about here. So we're not trying to compare to the person beside you that eats a really substandard diet, has poor eating patterns, poor sleeping patterns, doesn't move their body, has bad relationships. We start with this idea that a big part of the framework of how you function are the choices that you make in terms of what you eat. And then beyond that, we can start delving into neural health, your neuroemotional health, your relationships that you have, like you talked about, your sleep patterns and whatnot. So, it's a big part of it. And I also would encourage people to kind of, after you're starting to wrap up the education of this program, because it is 40 days, it is a lot to take in. And I know for a lot of people, especially people who are taking the program for the first time, it feels like a lot of nuts and bolts to put together. But once you start to make this your ongoing lifestyle, then I would definitely encourage people to start to look more into this, start to really educate yourself about how the physiology of the body actually works, because becomes more simple than you realize once you understand that, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's complicated, but it's not. It's really simple.
So let's talk a little bit about diversity and, how important is that in your diet?
Again, so let's talk about, let's talk about diversity. I'm a huge fan of nutrient diversity. And, a lot of this comes from all the different interviews I've done over the last 3 years from the podcast or the summits and just my education. But, again, it's the hunter-gatherer societies that live today and the hunter-gatherer societies that lived in other cultures that are more healthy, they would eat upwards of 100 plus different types of plant material throughout the year. Mm-hmm. Now, how many of your patients and people on this program, before they started the program, had oatmeal for lunch, a breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, maybe some lettuce and some tomato, maybe, and then like pasta with tomato sauce for dinner? I mean, that's like a standard American. Yeah. But there's nothing there. You could probably break down, like, people eat like 8 things, right? And that's it. And True. That does not support a healthy microbiome. And we haven't really talked about the microbiome, but that kind of plays into the serotonin, the dopamine, the intestinal permeability, the leaky gut, everything we've kind of talked about, and that's our immune system.
Yeah.
But nutrient diversity is really, really important. And if you are living or eating a grain-based diet, your nutrient diversity by proxy is extremely low. And then we could just talk about nutrient density. There's bread, oatmeal, rice. I'm a rice fan. I don't eat a lot of it, but I love rice. But there's nothing to it. There's nothing to it. It is a little bit of B vitamins, a little bit of protein, a whole crap ton of carbohydrates, but there's no phytonutrients, phytochemicals, polyphenols. There's very little insoluble fiber, soluble fiber, all those things that our bodies need, our mitochondria need, our microbiome need. And you're not getting that if your diet is filled with breads and pastas, and cakes and cookies and chips and pizza. It's just not. And ultimately, when you make that switch, it usually takes longer than 40 days. You find out that as much as a piece of pizza might sound good, a deliciously grown tomato is far tastier. Or broccoli, garlic, and olive oil with a little salt and pepper. Oh my God, it's a zillion times tastier. So you got diversity, you have nutrient density, and it's really, it's just right there. One of the interviews that I wanted to bring up that we did on the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast was with Dr. Tom Cowan. He's a long-term anthropomorphic doctor, like a brilliant guy. Weston A. Price, like brilliant doc. I remember the first time I heard him talk about the heart on the Sean Croxton podcast, where the heart is not a pump; it's like it's like fascinating. It blew my mind. And he recently started a company. It's called Dr. Cowan's Garden, and he grows and sources all these different plants from where he lives in California, and then he sources other things near the sea, and he makes these powders that makes it really easy to up your nutrient diversity. Because you don't need a lot of these. You don't need to eat 3 pounds of seaweed to up your diversity. You just need a little sprinkle of a little bit of a powder that your microbiome will say thank you and utilize those fibers and increase your microbiome diversity. But at any one time, I have 6 to 8 of these powders. They last a long time in these Myron glass jars.
Yeah.
At the current moment, I have horseradish, 2 different types of seaweed, burdock root, leek. And by the way, leek could possibly be the #1 food for your microbiome because it has like antimicrobial properties and the right fibers to really feed your microbiome. But I would highly suggest your audience to check that out for sure.
I am already I'm gonna put a link into the information because Tom Cowan, it's COWAN. I think that's such an important part of what we're talking about. And maybe you and I should be having a full different discussion about microbiome because I love the concept of microbiome. I only talk about it to some degree at the beginning of the detox, only because there's so much to integrate. But, needless to say, your prebiotic and your probiotic foods and the fact that cultivating and sustaining a variety of healthy gut bacteria goes part and parcel with all the things that we're talking about right now. So I think that's really important. So I would
let me cut you. I got to cut you off because this is why sometimes the universe just conspires. This is a quote that I copied from Instagram this morning, and it's so important for what we're talking about and for your program. It's from the online Time magazine. It says diets high in sugar are able to decrease your microbiome diversity within 1 week, a shift that has been associated with irritable bowel syndrome and diabetes.
Right. There you go.
Right?
See, social media can be so incredibly important.
Sometimes.
Lots of times, actually. I just think it always comes back to we eat, not literally 24 hours a day, but we have to make food choices every 24 hours in the day, 365 days a year. And, just learning some of these, I don't know if you're going to say tweaks, but just recognizing that eating a whole food diet is incredibly important. And it's actually quite a simplistic diet. Like you said, once your palate and your body starts to come to attune to the food that you're eating, it no longer tastes so delicious. To have these complex, processed, nutrient devoid foods, it starts to become wildly interesting and captivating to be eating simple foods with higher quality ingredients, but simplistically. I also advocate very much taking in whole food based nutrients. And so Dr. Cowan's stuff is something I'm also very interested in. So I appreciate that. Now, tell me how this figures into your family's lifestyle. Like, how old are your kids?
13 and 8.
Already?
So, yeah, I know. Oh my God.
Okay.
I know. It goes back to that lens. Like, I make all the decisions for my family's health through this ancestral lens. So I usually wear them. I decided not today, but my kids all have blue light blocking lenses because of all this unnatural light that didn't exist when we were developing as humans. It was only the sun, the stars, and the moon. They also have amber night lights in their room because that doesn't affect melatonin production. My kids are very, very active. They've done karate since they were 3, and I kind of look at karate as more of a functional movement type of exercise. They also play soccer, baseball, and basketball. My younger son has a strong aptitude to all sports, particularly soccer, and I'm tempted to just streamline him into that one sport, but that's not. We didn't move again ancestrally. The lens. We didn't move in one. We just didn't run back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to kick a ball. We did a lot of different things, and so that's. And then a diet, right? It's trying to have as much. I have a garden in my yard.
Yeah.
I have 3 apple trees, 2 pawpaw trees, blackberry bush. I have a cherry tree in the front of my yard. I have a garden on the side, and that allows them to go out and pick what they want to eat. And is it a challenge, particularly for my 8-year-old, because he's a massive sugar burner and his brain is faster than all of ours combined? Yeah, it's a challenge, but to have that lens to kind of make my decisions makes things a little bit easier.
Well, and I think it's helpful for people because the reality is, although, media tries to make us believe that these nutrients in whole grains are so incredibly important for our health, the reality is you can live you will live a far more exceptional health life if you really minimize the grains in your diet, correct? At the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to say, is that grains are not important in our diet in order to have a healthy lifestyle, correct?
No, they're not. There's no biological need for them. Just like just like dairy, people think we have to consume dairy for the calcium. We don't. It's not. It could be a want, but it is certainly not a need. And those two things, wants and needs, are very different things.
They definitely are. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Noah. I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and wrap this up. But
sure. First
of all, tell me, where can people get a hold of you, and remind everybody where they can get connected to Beyond Your Wildest Genes?
Yeah, so there's a couple, we talked about it a little bit already, but our website is www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com. You can go to YouTube and you could watch they're all audio, but you can watch the videos at, everything's Beyond Your Wildest Genes. So Beyond Your Wildest Genes on YouTube, Spotify, Beyond Your Wildest Genes. If you like to listen to podcasts, just go to iTunes in the search bar, put in Beyond Your Wildest Genes. That'll come up there. Twitter, Instagram, it's all Beyond Your Wildest Genes. And if anybody is in the New York, New Jersey area and they're looking for an awesome chiropractor, you could go at www.fccofbayonne.com, or just look up Dr. Noah DeCoyer, and we're just a few miles outside of New York City.
This is all true. Okay, so thanks, Dr. Noah. I totally appreciate it. And again, to everybody else who is watching today to the end, I might say, good job. Reach out to me. Let me know how this is going for you, and let me know what your plan is for your family and yourself when it comes to making this your ongoing lifestyle, and deciding with great intention where you want this to all fit into your overall plan. All right. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Noah. And
my pleasure.
goodbye. My pleasure. And goodbye to everyone else today.